Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing new technologies for putting out wildfires or maybe keeping them from catching in the first place. Who knows? We'll see. We're in development. So, as developments happen around the world, we learn about them. How do we learn about them? Well, some people have a preference as to how we learn about them. We say like, "Okay, break it to me slow," or all right, just tell it to me. I can take it." Well, how information gets to us has a big impact on how we receive that and how we're able to act on it. And the way we get most of our informations about wildfires are from professionals called public information officers. I've got Dr. Zachary Hall with us, and Dr. Zachary Hall has a great deal of experience in communications, particularly crisis communications. Welcome to the show. How are you, Doctor?
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, so break it down for me. What are the basics of how we communicate crisis to people? Um, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I borrow a lot from a number of other scholars, and one thing we learned through research is that when people are in crisis, they tend to be more emotional, and they tend to be scared, and they tend to be worried, and they may not be intellectually in a position to hear all the data that we need to give them. So our first thing is to meet them where they are. People, as Dr. Cavello famously said in many of his writings, people need to know that we care before they care about what we know. So we have to help them feel better before we can actually tell them the plan. And we do that in a number of ways. One way we do that is by demonstrating empathy and showing to them that this is a crisis, that uh, that we're all in this together, that we're prepared, that we have a plan, that we're there for them, and to help bring down their sense of panic. Uh, Americans and people in the West, research shows, have a reading grade level of around eighth grade. So most people, if you take an average, can read around the eighth grade. And research says that that reading level goes down by 2 or 3 grades in a crisis. So we have to keep it simple. We have to keep it short. We have to keep it clear. If we can do those things, then people will be prepared to hear our crisis messaging. I think added to that, the time to start communicating is not in a crisis. We need to develop trust. We need to develop relationships well before a crisis. And that's really leveraging the resources we have in what are called the sunshine days. Those are the days when there is no crisis. Those are the days that we're putting out information about emergency preparedness and also just the good things that our departments are doing in our communities so that we develop that sense of trust. We develop that sense that our departments are there for them, to service them, that we are the go-to source of information so that when there is a crisis, they turn to us and they don't turn to people who may not have their best interest at heart.
Okay. So there's been it seems a drought of information for people on wildfires in particular, and there seems to have been this kind of belief or misconception that we shouldn't tell people too much too soon because they'll panic, and we have to restrict the flow of information to them. Um, and it seems that that attitude seems kind of unique to the wildfire circumstance. If there's a hurricane coming towards the coast, they tell you, a week in advance, 300 miles off the coast, hey, this hurricane is forming. And there's no presumption like, oh, well, if people know about the hurricane, they're going to panic. No, they're going to board their windows and hopefully leave town. But with wildfires, like particularly like with the Fort McMurray fire, the morning of the fire, people are looking across the river, they're seeing the fire, and the PIO is telling them, hey, well, you can pick up your laundry, take your kids to school. If anything happens, we'll let you know. And clearly there was like an economic motive there, keep the factory open, keep the oil production going, as a predominant. But it does seem to have trickled over, like as a phenomena, like that people need to be spoon-fed little bits of information or they'll panic. Is there really evidence to support that that people panic when given information versus simply become better equipped to make decisions for themselves?
What you're describing are one of the PIO myths, and those myths have all been busted.
Right.
And unlike hurricanes and unlike tornadoes, those are weather phenomena that can be tracked. In case of hurricanes, days out. We know that, and so there's not an analogous to wildfires, especially in the way that we see them today, when they just move so fast
Yeah.
with the wind conditions that have changed, with the undergrowth that is present, that has not been managed. So hurricanes are not a good analogous. I would say, though, that the earlier we can get out information, the better. The more information we can get out, the better. Because as we say, if we don't tell our story, somebody else will.
Right.
And it's not like there's not information about the fire out there. It's like, well, if the PO doesn't send it, it's not like people don't know. It's not like it's not out there on Instagram, on Facebook, and all the other social media channels. It's out there, and it may not be the best information. It may not be correct information. It may be misinformation or malinformation. So we really are putting our citizens in a bad spot if we don't get out early and often. And so we have to be out in front of the story.
And stay out in front of them, right?
We have
Because the
to.
idea is, right, you don't want people to have seen something on watch duty and then 6 hours later that night they hear about it at your press conference. Right. So
No.
how do you keep that constant flow of information?
So first, research shows that from advertising, and that's one of my backgrounds,
Yeah.
is that someone has to see something 6 times, right? 6 times. And if for them to even think about taking an action. And so once is not enough. We have to beat the drum, and we have to have a plan. And often what happens is that we don't have a communication plan when there's a crisis. And because of a lack of a plan, then we think that we send out an information product and send out a message, that's sufficient. It's not. We need it. We need it early, and we need it often. And so, and we also need to segment by audience. There might be people who have access and functional needs, medical needs. They might have mobility challenges. So it might need to be even earlier than we really thought, that for the general population. My family was a survivor of the Camp Fire in Paradise, California. 85 people lost their life in that fire, predominantly senior citizens who just couldn't get out. And so if we can get out the information earlier, if we have people have a plan, if we have a plan as communicators, we have a much better chance of saving lives.
So you have to really be integrated with every aspect of the fire response, don't you? Because you can't communicate what the evacuation route is until someone has set the route.
That's
Uh,
right.
if there's people who can't get out because of mobility issues, you have to be coordinating with the services that are going to help get them out. So
Correct.
it's you can't just go create a great message, right? You really have
No,
to be working in concert with all of the other agencies or the
the,
aspect
the,
of the agencies.
the messaging is a very small part of what a PIO does. The PIO needs to be a coordinator. They need to be a leader. They need to be at the right hand of the incident commander or the EOC director. The communication is a very small part of what a PIO needs to do. And most of the work that they're going to do in a crisis, happens inside of the Joint Information Center, which is a mirror of the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. And that's a function that needs a lot of resources. It needs structure. It needs hierarchy. It needs personnel. And that all needs to be planned well ahead of time. When we prepare firefighters for wildland or structural fires, we don't just send them into a wildfire or structural fire and say, all right, well, you can figure it out. That we would never do that. Well, we can't do that with PIOs either. There really are first responders. The PIO may be the first person or voice or face that someone hears from in a crisis. And if we can get that message out early and often, clear and correct, then the firefighters and other emergency personnel don't have to go in and rescue all those people, right? We can save those resources for response instead of rescue. So PIOs are first responders in that respect.
So you have a great deal of training in this area. and a heck of a lot of experience. And I'm wondering, when you describe the attributes of a great PIO, um, do you feel like those are skills that can just be trained, or do you feel like a certain personality type is called for in order to do that job well, combined with the training?
Sure. So first and foremost, a great PIO has a great leader. And that chief executive, whether it's a fire chief or a police chief or some other public agency, has to have a chief that empowers the PIO to just do their job and
Yep.
gives them the right resources, understands what the PIO can do, what the PIO can't do, understands the time it takes to be a good PIO. And there's training and there's exercise, right? So even if a firefighter's gone through a 6-month academy, they're still on probation for a year after that. And they're constantly training, they're constantly doing exercises. And so a good head of an agency would understand that a PIO should do something similar to that. And sure, you can, there's probably people who are more naturally inclined to be a PIO, but I often say, when I train PIOs, and that's a good part of my job, is I'll ask a PIO, hey, how many people work in your organization? I'll say, all right, there's 200. And then I'll say, all right, well, how many PIOs do you have in your office? And they might say, well, there's 3 of us. And then I might say, well, remind me again, how many people work in the organization? They'll say 200. So tell me again, how many PIOs do you have? And eventually we'll get to the point that they understand that they actually have 200 PIOs,
There you
because
go.
every member of the organization is a PIO. Everyone can serve a PIO role, right? Are they going to be the head spokesperson? Are they going to be the lead PIO in a JIC? Maybe not, but everyone can be an ambassador. Everyone can carry the message. Yeah, what I can tell you is you could have the greatest tweet ever known. You could have the greatest Instagram message ever known. But what's going to really move the needle is those conversations that happen at your houses of worship, the conversations that happen at your kid's soccer game or hockey game in Canada, or what happens in your neighborhood barbecues. If you have employees who are carrying the message and explaining the great work that your organization does, that goes so much further than any other message that you could ever create. And so that when the message goes out to evacuate or to prepare, then people are ready, right? We've primed the pump. You can't do it that day, and it can't just be the PIO. It takes the whole organization.
Yeah, and that, of course, so much of that messaging has to be pre-planted, because just telling people, okay, it's time, evacuate, like, if they don't know what that means at that point, if they haven't practiced, if they haven't put together their go bag, if they don't have their meds ready, if they don't know where they're going, if they don't know how to coordinate with the rest of their family, like, that's not the time to learn that. So how do you pre-PIO that information so that when you finally give the go code, people are ready to go?
Uh, I try to live in reality. I don't expect people to actually prepare that much. I know we want them to. I know that's the ideal. If you were to take a survey or a poll and ask how many people have a go bag or have a plan, I would bet not that many people actually do. But we'd like them to. You know, I would even go so far as to say that most emergency responders probably don't either, or their families don't. And so, what I really try to educate our PIOs on is that we need to keep the message simple, we need to keep it clear, and we need to think in more pictures and less words. And so,
Hmm.
if we have evacuation routes, we need to put up maps. If we have routes that are normally open but now they're closed, we need to put up alternate routes. We need to keep beating that drum and you keep sending the message. And we need to, and this is the latest research, we need to encourage other people to repost what we post.
Okay.
Because when we ask, when other people repost what we post, the trust goes up, right? So the believability of what we say goes up when other people repost it. So, like, you might not believe me, Steve, PIO, in your jurisdiction, but you will believe your neighbor who reposts what I posted. You
I
know what I
see.
mean?
Okay.
So, right. So that we need the reposting. We need to say, hey, if you're able, go help your neighbor, right? And we also need to work with what we in the States call community-based organizations. And so they would have a list of people who will need that extra care to get out, right? Those mobility challenged people, those people who might be deaf or might be blind, or they might have some other challenge. They're working with those people all the time. They have a list of people, and we need PIOs to work with those community-based organizations so that they can then work with the communities that they work with every day and get out.
Yeah, because ordinarily you need a mobility van, you need at least a day's notice to
Right?
schedule that just to go to a supermarket. So let alone trying to get everyone picked up safely and brought to an evacuation shelter.
I'd like to make one more point on that. Um, Dr. Cavello also says frequently in his writings that the messenger is more important, is just as, if not more important than the message. I'll say it one more time so that makes sense. The messenger is just as, if not more important than the message. So who says it is more important than what is said. I'll give you an example to make that clear. So let's say you have an evacuation notice. Let's say you have a community that is hostile to government services, and then that might be for a whole host of reasons. Maybe that community's been disenfranchised, historically marginalized. Maybe there's been some abuse, or maybe there's just a general distrust of the government. And all of those things are likely and to some degree pretty reasonable. So if that's the case, then I know as a PIO that when I come in with my badge on, that I'm not going to be trusted. So I have to have a pre-established relationship with a leader in that community who I can get on the phone and say, hey, this is what's happening. You need to get your people out. It's coming now, get out. And then they can then mobilize their community, because it's going to be more impactful. It's going to make more of a difference coming from that leader of a community than coming from me. So I need to have those relationships established.
Yeah, and we saw really the distrust of good information kind of reach a head in COVID, which is not a wildfire, but disease spreads according to the same model. This infects that, and we saw information treated very much as a partisan topic, uh, depending on you would follow the health guidelines based on whether your beliefs aligned with the political beliefs of the person who was telling you whether you should vaccinate or not, or shelter in place or not, or maintain 6 feet or not. And it sounds like what you're describing with wildfire is very much the same thing. You have to have not just a relationship, but a positive relationship with the source of the information, or else you discount the information.
It's called confirmation bias, and you tend to believe the information when you believe the source of the information. And so we may not be a trusted source of information, even though it's correct, even though it's going to save them. We may not be the best people to hear from.
So what could be done about that? Like, how do you become a more trusted source? How do you change the reputational issues or build the relationships that you need to have so that
Sure.
the best information source is also the most trusted?
So earlier I said that we need executives who empower their PIOs. We need executives who get it. It all starts with them. Some of my earliest research is actually looking at how chiefs or leaders of organizations work with their PIOs to help the organization communicate better. So when I'm helping an individual PIO do exactly what you said, increase the reputational capital that an organization has, and that's what you're talking about, relational capital. We need the PIO to be out in the field. We need representatives of the organization, people in badges and uniforms, to be out in the field. And that might not be in uniform, it might be in civilian clothes, but as a representative, as an ambassador, right? And so that means the PIO is not in the office. If a PIO is spending too much time in the office, I don't think they can actually do their job. They should be out building relationships in the community. So it's funny when we talk about relationships that people have with minority groups, They might have all kinds of biases and stereotypes, but they like that one person that they know, right? They're like, oh, but Bob, he's not like that. He's a good guy. So we tend to like people, but we tend to distrust groups, right? So
Sure.
and so what we need is we need ambassadors to go out into the community to create personal relationships, so that builds the overall reputation of the organization, because now I know somebody in the organization.
Right.
So
And
we got to go to community groups, we got to go to fairs, we got to do all that stuff.
it's very much similar to the way they do community policing in Japan versus the way we do it here, right? You never see a police coming outside the squad car. And right, if they come to your house, they step out of the car and you actually get to shake a hand and meet somebody. Um, or of course, the way we're physically distributed requires that we drive. But in cities, they're more and more trying to take the cops out of the car, put them on the beat, get to know the local shop owners and the local business people, and meet the community, and really kind of make friends with people, because then information flows both ways, much faster and much more trustingly.
I agree, and that goes to what I said earlier, that every employee is a PIO.
Yeah,
Every employee is a brand ambassador.
I think there's a
Eh,
book by that name, right? Like
right.
all employees are salespeople.
That's right. They all are. And I want to give credit to a lot of organizations that I see. You've got um, in the U.S. we've got all kinds of like fill the boot program to get toys for kids at Christmas time. We've got cops doing trying to make fun videos on TikTok, and it's not for a lack of trying. I don't want to say
Right.
that people don't get it. They get it. It just, when you look at um, what the PIO's role is in that, right? So, or do we just have a kind of a scattershot approach, and we're like, well, some other department's doing it, so we should do it? Or is there actually an organized campaign with measurable objectives that we're trying to meet over the course of a year to measure how well people like us? So, so we have these kind of like uh, disorganized campaigns, but there's no structure behind it to make sure it's actually working and cohesive, right? And so we need a PIO who has the time to do that. And so again, it comes back to, is leadership empowering the PIO to do the actual job of a PIO? Or does the leader just expect the PIO to just put out a bunch of random social media messages and hope for the best?
Yeah. So, what are the factors that influence the leader in order to make the right decisions about how to empower the PIO?
Right. So sometimes PIO is lucky enough to get a leader who gets it, right? So maybe they're self-taught, or maybe they've had a PIO in the past that trained them. Sometimes they come up from the PIO. More often than not, what happens is that a leader comes up through operations, right? They had a badge on, and
Right.
then they go through the ranks, and eventually they become the chief. And some departments make them do a tour through the PIO. Sometimes they do, which is a really smart department. Sometimes they don't. So what we've been trying to figure out is how to actually create classes for chiefs, not to how to be a PIO, but to understand their role. And this is how Dr. Kotler phrases it. The chief is the unofficial chief communication officer of an organization. And they need to know that. And more often than not, they don't. They're like, I want a PIO so I don't have to be on camera. That, I
Oh,
want a PIO to be in between me and the media. That's how they see it. And so if that's their perspective, then they see the PIO as just making the media go away, because they see the media as the opposition. They see the
right.
media as an interference, as an unnecessary evil, really. And so if that's their perspective, then we've got a lot of challenges. So we've been trying to figure out how to get executives in a room to say, hey, you need a PIO. Here's your role. Here's what the PIO can do. Here's how they can help you. That has been a challenge. Leaders who get it, though, they invest in their PIOs, and it's amazing to see, and it's pretty measurable. When I teach PIOs and I lead them in seminars, I start off with kind of a thing that I say that if I look at 3 documents in your organization, I can predict whether you're going to be successful or not. And it only takes 3 documents. It's the org chart, it's your job description, and it's your comms plan. If I look at those 3 things, I can tell you if you're going to be successful or not. The org chart, and this is a pretty easy fix, right? It doesn't cost money to change your position in the org chart. If there's a position in the org chart between you and the leader, between you and the chief, you're probably not going to be successful because you're not at the executive table, right? You're not in the ear of the chief 24/7. You're not at the table when decisions are being made. The decision gets made and you're told just to sell it. And that's a really rough spot to be in because the PIO is the only person whose sole job is to represent the public. It's their sole job. The other difficult thing is when you're not right below the chief. So in an org chart, you've got the chief, then right below them, you usually have legal, then you've got finance, you've got HR, IT, and then operations. If the PIO is in that line, right, then the PIO can go toe-to-toe with everyone else. They can go toe-to-toe with HR to write a good social media policy with HR, right? They can go toe-to-toe with legal so that we can communicate when maybe there's some sort of crisis of confidence and we need to be ahead of the story and legal saying don't say anything. And if that happens, then a rumor mill spins out of control. And now we're fighting a 2-front war, right? That's not good. Maybe there's some sort of personnel issue. Maybe there's some sexual harassment. Maybe there's embezzlement. There's all kinds of things that happen in an organization. The PIO always winds up having to clean it up. So the PIO should be working with in conjunction on the same level as everyone else so they can usually do their job. Otherwise, you're never going to win as a PIO and you're always on defense. You can never be proactive. So that's one thing I look at. The other thing I look at is your job description. Is PIO your only job or is it one of many jobs? That's what I look at too. If it's duties as assigned, then you're probably not going to be successful because you're not given enough time to actually do your job. Right? And then I start looking at, in your job description, is it expected that you're working with the community? Is it expected that you're part of the leadership team? Is it expected that you have many years of experience in media or in marketing or in advertising, right? Are they expecting a professional or are they expecting someone who just goes to a few week-long classes and now they're a PIO, right? It's not that easy. And then I look at the comms plan. If there's not a comms plan, right, that's a huge red alert for me. If there is comms plan, but it's dated or it's really just an appendix to some sort of other emergency operation plan, that's a red flag. So I start looking at how that comms plan is written. Those things will tell me if a PIO can be successful or not. And it tells me if a leader really gets it or not.
And those are all things that are fairly mutable, right? You can change the chart, change the description.
You can, 100%. Yeah.
So tell me about the role of a PIO as a coach, because I would imagine that there are certainly occasions where a fire chief or the head of an agency happens to be really good on camera, right? They communicate well, they're trustworthy, they have reputation, they have good connections, and maybe the PIO decides, the best face for this organization to the media is the chief, and I'm just going to coach him or her, right, on what we're going to say, what we're going to do, how we're going to walk the public through this. Is that an approach that you take when the opportunity presents?
Absolutely. The PIO needs to be the media coach in chief, right? And so if the crisis is big enough, that chief does need to be in camera. That's why the chief is the unofficial chief communication officer. And if it's big enough, if the reputation of the organization is at stake enough, then that chief needs to be out there, right? People, when there's a crisis, especially, people need to know that things are going to be okay. They need the presence of command and control. They need to know that there's a plan, that personnel are trained for this, that they're ready for this, and they need to see the confidence and they need to hear the confidence from that chief to know it's going to be okay. Because if the person on camera looks panicked, then that's a signal that says to everyone else, panic. It's all falling apart. So the chief does need to be out there. And And that's why the relationship between the chief and the PIO needs to be so close. And that's why the PIO needs to be at the top of the org chart, right below the chief. Because if the PIO is so subordinate to the chief, then the PIO can't be honest with the chief, right?
Right.
There's
Yep.
not that trust that's built up because they don't deal with the chief all the time. So it's really hard to coach someone you don't work with all the time because there's no trust. And the time to coach your chief on how to deal with the media is not 10 minutes before a crisis, right? This is
Right.
something that we're going to work on once a month, every couple of weeks. And we're going to work on just how to hold yourself in front of a camera, how to deliver the message, and then also what is the message and how to state the message. And so one thing that we use, and this is also from research, we call it a single overriding communication objective, right? We call it a SACO. It's the one thing you want people to know or do after they hear the message. And it should be like 5 words, 7 words tops. And so we work with the chief to figure out what is the thing we want people to know after you speak. What do we want them to know or do? And so we coach them on, make sure this gets in every answer to the media. No matter the question, the answer is, get out now, shelters are open. I don't care what they ask, but the answer is, get out now, shelters are open. Here's where to find more information. So that no matter what soundbite the media takes, the critical information is in it. And we coach them over and over and over again till it's rote, till they feel robotic. I want, I want a chief to feel so comfortable with that messaging and that is how I phrase it, that they could do it blindfolded, going down the stairs backwards in heels.
I'd like to see that.
Right. It needs to be so automatic that they don't think about it.
Right.
But it takes a lot of coaching, and that coaching needs to not happen in the crisis. Again, sunshine days.
Right. Well, in wildfire, I guess sunshine days are heating and drying days, right?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
In the middle of the winter.
Yeah, right. The one of the worst fires in Colorado was the Marshall Fire, which was in the middle of the winter,
Right.
the day before New Year's Eve. So that's really, I guess, a point that PIO is never on vacation, right? There's never a time where it's like, oh well, I think nothing's going to happen this week. I'll be out of here.
Right. I
Somebody's
think
already
it's almost
at the helm.
Almost destiny that if you go on a family vacation, that's when something bad's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why you need what we call a crisis communication plan, so that somebody else can do it if you're not available.
Yeah. And the fact that you're coming back from vacation to take over this situation actually reads well with the media, right?
Right.
And it's like, hey, so-and-so is on vacation. He's on a flight back to the capital right now to handle this. That makes people feel like, oh, wow, this person's committed to this job.
Exactly.
And they are the go-to person, or else they would, right, the subordinate would be handling it. Okay. So tell me about the budgets that are assigned for PIO functions, and are there different agencies that value the PIO role differently, such that they fund the staffing and the training and the recruiting, at various levels? And for agencies that don't have or choose not to, either choose not to or can't afford to invest a lot in the PIO programs, what are the options for those communities?
Sure. So I'm not concerned about the number because that's going to change at jurisdiction, size of the community. What I'm concerned about is, and this is why I look at the job description, is I'm concerned about how much control does the PIO have over their own budget, whatever it is. Can they use are they given a certain amount, right? Is it just automatically allocated, right? Or do they have to beg, borrow, and steal every year? And then I want to know, can they choose to allocate resources based on their comms plan? So they would lay out a comms plan for a year, and they would say, all right, I need X amount of dollars to do these things. And so if they can know that they can depend on a certain funding source, and if that's consistent, and then they can control it, that goes a long way for them doing their job. And then, let's say they need, I don't know, let's say they need $100,000, and the chief's like, we don't have $100,000. That's fine, right? It's expected. We expect that we need to do more than we have resources. I get it. The chief's like, no, I can get you 75. Okay. So if you have a comms plan, then you say, all right, chief, here are the 10 things I need to do this year. And this is what I need the money for. Okay. You've given me 3/4 of what I need. Fine. Then I can only do 3/4 of the things in the plan. And the chief's going to like say, no, you have to do all of them. And then you say, well, but you only gave me 3/4 of the money. And I need another body to do the job. So, well, we don't have another body. Then you say, all right, well, then you help me prioritize. Of the 10 things, what are the 7 I'm going to make sure I do? If there's extra time, I'm going to do the other 3. But help me prioritize what I'm going to do. Because without the comms plan, you really can't argue for a budget because you have no basis to ask for the money. And then you have no basis the next year to say, here's how I spent the money, here's what it did, and here's why I need this much money next year. So they continue that. Here's how I move the needle. But there's no way to make an argument for people. There's no way to make an argument for money. There's no way to make an argument for training or exercises or time to go in the community if I don't have a plan. And that's why I need to see your plan in order to know if someone's going to be successful or not.
Okay. So they have objectives, right? And then depending on the budget, you prioritize and say, okay, these are the ones I can afford to do. These ones we'll get to if we could.
Right.
Right. That makes sense. So then where do we go with establishing metrics for how successful were we? How do
Right.
we gauge things like how much does this community trust its chief? How much does this community trust its PIO? Then we did these things and then the needle moved. Well, how do we know the needle moved? Like, so what are the
Yeah.
metrics that you use and how do you how do you do the testing to find out whether the PIO is being successful, in those sunshine days?
Right. So there's a famous saying in advertising that says, it goes like this: half of all money spent on advertising is wasted. We just don't know which half.
Right.
Right. And
Yep.
so, when we start talking about metrics and goals, we have 2 different kinds of goals that we can talk about. We can talk about outcome goals versus output goals. Output goals are what the content that we create, that we distribute, or the events that we participate in, right? Those are
Right.
clearly measurable. Clearly.
And
We know
less
how many
less
posts we
valuable,
put
right?
out. We know how
Yeah.
many events we went to, like clearly measurable.
Right.
And then you have outcome goals, which is what you described, which is the perception of the chief, how many people evacuated, how many people went to shelters, right? And so when it comes to communication, and this is really what's difficult, is it's hard to attribute the outcome to a
Yeah.
specific communication activity. We don't
But you
know
can
if they
take
evacuated,
credit for it. I mean,
right? I mean, we could take credit, but we don't know.
yeah.
Um, and so, if you had enough money, you could have focus groups to say, all right, well, the chief's reputation is this, January 1, and now we do another focus group in December. How did it change? Right?
Sure.
We could do that. Um, what we're looking for, and this is why the comms plan is important, and it's different in every jurisdiction. But you would looking for, how many people retweeted something or how many people like something. Those are they're like low cost, low hanging fruits to give us maybe, not direct information, but kind of an awareness that things are going in a positive direction, right? When we put out a post, you know, do we get a lot of negative reaction to it, right? So, or are we getting mostly positive? So, we do need, in the part of the plan, we need time to do what's called media analysis, or what we would call um, kind of perception or perception analysis. So we need time to do that. One of the other sayings we have is that if you're working in your business all the time, you don't have time
Right.
to work on the business.
Yes.
And we need a lead PIO who can really fly at 30,000 feet to be a leader, to do the strategic things, to do the analyses, to make the relationships. And then they might have 1 or 2 PIOs, below them, who can actually do the content creation, who can send out the messaging, who can do all that other stuff. And we're also kind of educating the next cohort of lead PIOs.
Yeah. So
And
there's yes, so many things have to happen simultaneously.
So,
Uh,
in a dream world, Steve, in my dream is that the lead PIO is not a lead PIO. They're a communications director or director of communications.
yes.
That's really what we're talking about. Is someone who's a communications director, and then they have a cadre of PIOs working for them to do the day-to-day work.
Okay, that makes the most sense, right? Because what the overall job is to make sure that an agency communicates well with the public, and how it does that could be any number of ways. Restricted probably only by the creativity of that comms director.
I agree.
Okay, so what are the best practices in the space right now? Let's go particularly towards wildfire evacuation. Uh,
Mhm.
what messaging from what source delivered when and how often gets people to evacuate?
Sure. The, so the first we know that people don't want to evacuate. The research shows that people don't want to evacuate, and I've done research into actually a number of different kind of crises, and people don't want to evacuate for all kinds of reasons. They don't think it's going to be that bad, or maybe they survived the last one,
Right,
or they don't have the money to evacuate. They don't know where to go. You see this a lot in hurricanes, for example, and
right.
and so we have to, again, realize that education on evacuation doesn't happen in the crisis. If you want to change someone's mind and heart, we know that that has to be a constant campaign. We need the money and the resources to churn out content year round. The campaign never stops. It's ongoing all the time for evacuation. And we also know that if our goal is 100% evacuation, we're always going to fail. We're not going to
If,
get 100% of people. We know that.
right,
So we have to be realistic with what we can actually do as an organization, as a PIO role. You know, and what we're looking really at is, did we get more people out, this year than we did last year? Can we just,
sure.
incrementally improve, right? So, and so we need to have the metrics of who got out and when, and that's why we have the relationships with those community-based organizations. There's not any one message. There's not a silver bullet. But what I can tell you is that it's a constant campaign throughout the year. It's constant relationships with the community-based organizations. It's a constant relationship with people who are members of communities, again, that have been marginalized, disenfranchised, the overall distrust of the American government. Do we have leaders that we can talk to regularly so that they're aware of what's going on, and so we talk to them and they get people out? And so those are that's how we do it. But there's not a silver bullet. There's not one channel. There's not one message, and we have to get away from the thinking that this is going to be an easy answer. It's not.
Right, right. You basically have to be good at a lot of things over a long period of time to be effective.
You have
Building those relationships, getting the messaging out, uh, getting the trust built.
right, and to get the trust built, um, we also have to own our mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. We can't hide them. We have to own them. People are really forgiving. What they're not forgiving of is a cover up. So if we make a mistake, either on the comm side or the operation side, it's going to happen. We're an organization of people. We're fallible, right? Something's going to go wrong in any operation. Just own it, because it's better if we get it out than if somebody else gets it out and then they think there's a conspiracy, and that's going to kill the trust. So we have to be humble enough to own the mistake, explain to people what we did, how we got it wrong, and how we're going to do better next time.
That's all you could do, right? And
All you can
just
do.
just the way you learn from your experiences. Unfortunately, the public sometimes learns from their experiences, and sometimes what they learn is the wrong thing, right?
Right.
If they've successfully ridden out 3 hurricanes, they're going to be more confident that they could ride out the next one, not
Right.
realizing that the nature of hurricanes has changed drastically. And I think we saw this in Katrina. a great deal, right? People had ridden out hurricanes in the 50s and 60s, like, I got this, and not realizing, like, hey, it's a whole new ball game out there. And ditto with wildfire. You may have ridden out the past few or got lucky or the flames went around your house, but the intensity of these fires is really, not leaving a trace.
No.
But it's a new ball game, and so whatever you know about the old fire may be working against you
And
because
that is a message we need to get out early and often. And again, not in the crisis. We've
yeah,
got to stop thinking of crisis communication as in the crisis. It's not in the crisis. It's
right,
all the time.
right. Like healthcare. If your only interaction with healthcare is when you're sick, you're probably not going to be very healthy.
No.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Dr. Hall, is a fascinating conversation. I think I would definitely want to come back and hear more from you because how we get the messaging out about wildfire, not just to the public, but even within agencies and within firefighters who, are going off into something new, no matter how prepared they are for it. It's such a valuable topic. I really want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Boy, it's like a real professional. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can't have a better guest on a show than a master PIO because they get the message out, get it out right, and we'll give you a chance to get it wrong next time, maybe. And so that way
Right.
you could have something to correct and take
Look
ownership
forward to
for
it.
and demonstrate the process of how you take ownership of things. But you didn't give me that opportunity today. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Hall, so much. You've been listening to or hopefully watching the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and we'll see you at the next show. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.